I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we've been taking a look at Groundhog Day after day after day after day. I'm your host, Bubbawheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we're doing a recap of this season. It's been so fun. I didn't want it to end just yet. Also, I've been taking notes like a crazy person on a big spreadsheet, but I'm not just going to sit here and spew facts on the air. I figured I needed somebody to bounce these stats off of. And one of the first people that I thought of to join me was Jay Cluett, but he was on just a couple episodes ago. The second person was Dylan. So how's that for an intro for you?
It's very flattering. Anytime you're in the same conversation as Jake Cluett, you're in good shape. Unless it's opinions about the rankings of the Jurassic Park films.
Yes, but I've touched on my spreadsheet here and there on this show before, but I have been tracking a lot of different things, and this is also the first time that I actually sat down and watched the film from beginning to end since I started doing this. For all the other episodes, I just watched that day over and over again, anywhere between like 3 times to like over 20 times for some of the really short loops. So it's been interesting to actually see it start to finish again. And I know you mentioned you didn't get a chance to rewatch it recently, but do you remember the last time you watched it?
I don't know off the top of my head. Funny you mentioned spreadsheets. I keep spreadsheets of all the movies I've seen. I could look it up, but I do not have that prepared. It's probably been, I don't know, a year, maybe a little more. Nothing crazy. It hasn't been that long, and it's a movie that's near and dear, and I've seen it plenty of times.
Do you remember like whenever you first saw it, or like your?
No. Not at all. So it came out in what, 93?
Yeah, 93.
I'm pretty sure I didn't see it in the theater. I mean, I was of an age where I certainly could have. It would have been the type of movie I might have seen, but it also, I was 16, 17. Maybe that's looking a little old, but it's probably something I rented when it came out quickly thereafter. But I don't have a lot of like memories of first viewings or anything like that.
Yeah, I actually don't think I've really talked about the first time I watched it, but I'm just like you, I'm just a few years younger than you. I would have been 13 whenever the movie came out. So there's a good chance that I saw this in theaters, but I don't remember the theatrical experience. This is just, again, one of those movies that I've just always known.
Well, I mean, you're up on this movie, having done an entire season of podcast on it. How much money did it make? Was it I want to say it made in the like $40 to $60 million range for the era.
That's one of the things that I didn't actually ever talk about. For this show, I've been focused on like mostly all the minutia of what you see on screen. And
the bigger picture has been lost. It made
yeah.
70 million upon its original release. So for the era, that was pretty damn successful, especially for a romantic comedy, high concept romantic comedy.
Yeah, and just to start off with a few quick facts and figures that I double checked on this last rewatch. This movie has 2 car chases, 10 slaps, and 6 deaths.
On screen, at least, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention probably tens of thousands of off-screen deaths. How many of the slaps are like in succession? I feel like there's a montage or quick clip of like 5 or 6 of them in a row.
Yeah, there's one slap early on where Phil thinks he's having deja vu, and then there's one slap during the first time the date goes bad, and then there's 8 slaps in the montage.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned that you had rewatched it and picked up on several things, and it's a testament to the film that you can watch it over and over and over and over again and still pick up on things.
Yeah, surprisingly, there were two specific details that I noticed this time that I did not notice in doing this season. And the first one is at the very beginning, whenever Phil is first looking at Rita, whenever she's playing with the blue screen, he cracks like just the tiniest hint of a smile. Like you just see the corner of his mouth just perk up like just a millimeter, like just enough to show like especially if you're watching this in the theater on a big screen, like there is something there. And then he plays it off whenever he's talking to Kenny. He's like, no, she's not my kind of fun.
I was going to say, do you think that's really Phil trying to hide something that is there, or is that Bill Murray trying to hide something that wasn't supposed to be there just because it was genuinely amusing?
It's tough to say, but I like to think that it was Phil just because, and I've gone back and forth. I've actually mostly come to the conclusion that that's not the first time that Phil sees Rita. I've developed a theory that Rita actually has been working at the station for a while, and Phil noticed her, but they've never actually worked directly together until this movie.
So you've written an entire backstory to the film. You're ready for the prequel, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Where Rita's a production intern or something like that, and Phil demands coffee from her or something like that.
Yeah, and now she's worked her way up to the producer for the actual news.
What was the other thing you noticed?
The other thing I noticed was whenever Phil and Rita are at the diner for the first time, and Rita says, "These sticky buns are amazing." And then Doris, the waitress, she's looking directly at Phil and she's like, "Yes, they are, aren't they?" Which that's, clues that Doris has the hots for Phil just right then, which shows up later whenever she gets in the bidding war for Phil at the Bachelor auction.
That's a good one. That's a good catch.
Yeah,
of which I have nothing to add to, but it's a good catch.
But yeah, so getting back to this spreadsheet, and like I said, it's like a crazy person, and I shared it with you, and you took a look at it, and you're like, I have no idea what I'm looking at. But I've been asking everybody on this show 3 questions, but 2 of them I kept track of on this spreadsheet. So the first question that I asked was how long that they thought that Phil has been stuck in Groundhog Day. And the second question, I didn't actually ask everybody, but I asked everybody that was appropriate to ask how long they thought that Phil was stuck in Groundhog Day at that point in the movie that we were at.
Right.
Which it doesn't make sense to ask,
No.
early in the beginning, and it doesn't make sense to ask at the very end.
Right. I mean, it's funny because I don't know about you, but the first few times you watch this movie, or maybe just until the point where someone came up with the theory, which is out there on the internet. Who knows who came up with it first? You might. I was not one of these people who ever considered that he was there for 10,000 years or 1,000 years, or that he really was a god at certain points in this movie. The first time you watch it, you probably just think he's there for like 20 or 30 days, right? Maybe a couple months. You don't really put into the thought that, oh wow, how long did it actually take him to master the piano, to master ice sculpting, to master all of these things, to master the synchronization of a day, and how many attempts did it take to get it just right? To make it, it's one thing to make it an hour through the day, but he has to make it 16 hours through a day basically for it to be the perfect day.
I think there's basically 3 main days that Phil would have had to have prepared ahead of time in order to try and make perfect. The first one is early on. It's on day 6, and that's the armored car robbery in Haiti too.
Say the bank heist, right? Yeah. So it would have taken a lot longer than 6 days to have come up with that.
Right.
I mean, he's got it down to the minute or to the second, a gust of wind, 5, 6, 7, et cetera, et cetera. So, but when you're watching it for the first time, you're not imagining, oh wow, it took this guy months to prepare just for this one day. Now, I guess so a couple things. One, I don't know how long it is. Let's go with I don't think I like the 10,000 years or 1,000 years. I don't think it would really take that long to do these things. But my counter to that, before I give kind of a final answer, is it could be intercutting a lot of this stuff. You know, they play a lot of the movie out for like sketches, right?
Mhm.
So we have days that are shown in sequence, and we have days that are kind of intercut where there's just like seconds of a day shown. And you covered some of this on the show, but it's like when we see just a rapid montage of the same 10 or 20-second segment of a day, are we to interpret that that's the only meaningful thing from that day and just tally that on your list of days, or is that connected to another piece of a day we see elsewhere in the movie? That makes sense.
That's actually something that I haven't really thought of or discussed on this show. But there is, and there's one sequence in particular, and I pointed it out on the episode that I recorded for it. But during the piano training montage, you see him slowly getting better at piano, and then right smack dab in the middle of that, he's mastered an ice sculpture, and that just comes out of nowhere. And that's like on my spreadsheet, that's where I gave up. Like I was keeping track of every single day. It's like, okay, this, because it feels like it's like you're seeing it sequentially through the course of time.
And that's what I think a lot of people interpret when they come up with these outlandish year things. It just doesn't seem logical to me.
Yeah, but I like that one, just that's the one thing that just completely throws me off, because you see him start learning piano, and then you see him have already mastered ice sculpture, and then you see him a little bit better at piano.
Yeah. So short story, long, I don't know, 100 years, 20 years, something in that range, in the years, but not the crazy amount of years. That would be my guess.
Yeah, so for everybody that I've talked to, the shortest length of time was Heather, who guessed like 10 to 12 months.
Yeah, that seems a little too low. It seems a lot too low.
Yeah, and then the longest ones are Sean and Jay, who both said, 10,000 years or thousands of years.
Right.
Which Sean is more on the Buddhist side of like the reincarnation, is like, you're reincarnated over the course of 10,000 years in order to reach nirvana.
It's certainly an intriguing thought point, but
and I think it's funny because on the other side, Jay's, his thousands of years is like, he feels like at that point he must have been driven totally insane and come back around again.
Right.
And at that point he has, like, in Jay's point of view, which, people listening to this have just heard it a couple episodes ago, but he liked to think that, Phil was at a point where he was no longer able to function in society after living through this day over and over and knowing exactly how the day was going to go. He could no longer function not knowing that the day is going to repeat and experiencing new things again.
It just gets too fantastical for me to think of it in terms of thousands, any kind of thousands. Yeah. When I mean, the whole film is a high concept gimmick, and it's a fun one. But when you get into, I don't know, it's part of the appeal for a lot of people, I imagine, is the whole philosophical element of it. I just don't feel like that was ever the intention of the creators. It was more, okay, this guy's stuck in the day, and here are these wacky things we can subject him to, and it's growing towards an end point based on his spiritual and emotional growth, but just it's all fan service or fan theories that are fueling this thousands of year Buddhist stuff. And if I had any kind of inkling that that's what the creators were looking for, I might be more on board with it, but I don't.
As I've been going through like the days, I think the first 5 days are the first 5 days in sequence.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the first big jump is that armor card robbery. And I think that on my spreadsheet, I gave that 150 days. And that's not just for the armored car robbery, because I think that's about 100 days just to get to the idea of the armored car robbery. And then like 50 days for the actual planning.
Yeah, I can get on board with that.
And then I generally give each day, anywhere between 5 to 10 days in fill time. And then the next big jump, I think, or not a huge jump, but whenever he starts getting slapped, whenever the Rita date goes south. And I have that at about 215 days. So that's
I noticed that the max that you go up to is barely over a year. So what, I guess, begs the question of what is your perspective on the total number of days? No, you don't have it filled in for the last.
Yeah, because I think, because as I was doing this and staying with Phil, I feel like, and I think most people who have tried to examine this and look at it through statistics and, a lot of people, and I've mentioned this before several times, a lot of people go back to the 10,000 hours concept,
Sure.
which I think has basically been debunked, that the whole, 10,000 hours of dedicated learning is what you need to become a master of just about anything. And
right.
In this movie, Phil becomes a master at piano playing and ice sculpting, and potentially a couple other learn in French. Although I don't think he really became a master at French, because we don't really see him speaking French. We just see him saying one line in French, which was actually a song lyric and not from a French poem. But all of his self-improvement happens in the movie in the last 4 or 5 days.
Right? Yeah.
Like it basically, we see, by my count, 35 days. 35 Groundhog days. And then we see the day before and the day after.
What do you mean all of his self-improvement stuff happens in the last 4 or 5 days?
Well, 4 or 5 days that we see in the movie, because the day, day 28 is whenever he has the "I'm a God" speech and has the science experiment, or I like to think of it as like the friendship date with Rita, with him reading poetry, and
where he starts to get overeager towards the end of it, which then spirals to like his second depression.
No, this is whenever he's reading poetry to her and she falls asleep with him, and that's whenever he decides to become better. And that's at day 28 out of 35 days. So that's just 6 days that the audience sees before the end, which is pretty close to the end. We don't really get to see that much. And then, day 29 is a piano lesson. Day 30 is a piano lesson. 31 is,
and that's all we see of the piano lessons.
Yeah, there's 3 days of piano lessons, and then there's 2 days of the old man, and then the very next day is the perfect day.
Well, I guess that's where I would have some point of contention with your sheet. So you've got day shown in the film 28 as 365 actual days to this point, and the next day of each you have as the first piano lesson, and the next day of each you have as lesson number 2. So you're saying that whatever he's shown as having learned on lesson 2, he learned in one day.
Yeah, because the lesson 2 is just him still very badly playing the scales. And at the end of the first piano lesson, you see him you can hear him starting to play the scales. And it sounds very similar. So I feel like the second day and him badly playing scales and the piano teacher wincing, that
Well,
could very
le-
conceivably be his second lesson.
let me put it to you this way then. If you don't buy into the whole 10,000 hours thing, how long do you think it would take him to go from 0 piano ability to the amount shown at the end of the film?
Well, I mean, I did talk quite a bit to David Brooke a few episodes ago, and he does actually know how to play the piano. Like, he's not exactly a master piano player, but he can play pretty well. He can read sheet music, and he thought that it would take several years to become the piano player that we see on his last day, because it's not just learning to play one piece.
Sure.
It's learning to play
And he's playing different as well.
Yeah, he's playing 3 different pieces with no sheet music, and he's transitioning from classical to another style of music.
And he's not even looking at one point. He's playing that well. I mean, I'm not as good a piano player as David Brooke, but I did take piano lessons as a child, and the only counter to that I would offer was how many hours a day is he spending learning this, right? Is he, it's one thing for, the child to take a 1 hour lesson a day and then 1 hour practice maybe a day. He could be spending 8 hours a day practicing piano for all we know.
Yeah, and I did hear from, another guest, which I didn't actually see it myself, but Robert Black, who spent a year watching Groundhog Day every single day and blogging about it. And then the next year he watched it once a month for another year. And he says that there is a point where you can actually see that there is a piano at the Cherry Street Inn where Bill Murray is staying. So he does have a piano at the inn.
Got access.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to attribute at least a year to it, I think, bare minimum, to go from 0 to hero at the level he does. I mean, could you fake a few songs? Perhaps, but that's the whole point of it. He's not faking anything. He's genuinely learned all these things, and
yeah, he's doing this to improve himself.
Right, yeah. Right. I don't think he needed as much time to learn how to change a tire, but
because I like the reading of this movie that it's more about Phil Connors improving himself. And then he ends up getting Rita as a side effect.
Yeah, I agree with that. He's open to new experiences and people that he might have considered before, and now he sees the beauty in her. He I wouldn't say the beauty, but he sees the charm of Ned and of I can't remember Chris Elliott's character's name at the moment.
Larry.
But, he's just not a dick. He learns to appreciate life for all that it brings, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And to be selfless.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I've been keeping track of is I like to call them like the milestones of the movie. Basically the points that we keep seeing, and in order for the film to show the audience the repetition. And I have 7 different milestones, as I like to call them. And the first one and the most obvious one is I Got You, Babe, with the clock radio. And I have that one that's the one that you're shown the most. We see that 10 times through the course of the movie, and that's counting the time on February 3rd, which is not technically part of the repetition. It's like the fake out.
Mm-hmm. It feels like you see it more, but I trust your math.
I didn't go back and double check, but I think that there's at least one time where you see the clock, but you don't hear the music. And I believe this is when I counted just whenever you hear the music with the clock.
Okay.
So I think you do see the clock 1 or 2 more times without the music. And then the other most frequent thing we see is Gobbler's Knob and the Groundhog report. And we see that 9 times. And you see that a lot of different ways. Although I actually noticed again this time that it was something that caught me the day after his Heidi 2 viewing, where he's dressed as Bronco. I noticed that, he says, "Does Phil feel lucky?" And I thought that was like a callback to him wearing like a Clint Eastwood outfit. But I did notice that he actually says, "Does Phil feel lucky?" in the very first Groundhog Day report.
Oh yeah.
So
No, I really appreciate your top 7 here. It's taking me back, and I'm at the same time I'm questioning, but also trusting. I'm like, really? They only showed this? Okay, well, I guess that's right.
yeah. And then the next one is the homeless man, which we see him 7 different times, including the 2 times where he dies at the end of the day, which most people feel like Phil tried to save the man a lot more than just twice.
Of course, yes.
Because it's one of those things, and I've talked about this too, but the fact that this film is very efficient and it uses a lot of shorthand in order to make the viewer's mind fill in the gaps a lot more. So in your mind, you're like, every day that they hint at, your mind fills in a lot more of Phil's day that we don't actually see.
Well, this is why people came up with the whole 10,000 years, right? Because we might only see the homeless man dying a couple times, but it's you take your context clues that he's tried to save him dozens, if not hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
And it's only at a certain point where he realizes that this is not something he can do, that some things are just going to happen whether he likes it or not, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I think it does that with a lot of things. I mean, we talked about the piano lessons. You've got to take context clues. That's a big thing about this movie, right? Is It's not just what we're shown, it's reading between the lines about the numerous other things. Like, he might have thrown himself off a building and electrocuted himself, but how many other ways did he try to kill himself, right?
Yeah, I mean, in his list, he lists like 6 or 7 different things, and only 2 of them were ones that we actually saw on screen.
Sure.
And all the other ones were completely different ways.
And like, how many times do we actually see him try to escape Punxsutawney? I feel like it's only once that's actually shown on screen.
It's just the first time.
But you feel like that's something he might have tried.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not dozens of times, but at least more than once. He might have gone a different route. Maybe that'll get him out. Maybe the weather's better there. But
yeah, and another thing that I've asked every person on here is for them to come up with a scene that they would like to see that Phil had to have. And especially in the first half, a lot of people did come up with that. They're like, I want to see Phil trying to go out of Punxsutawney. Like, I want to see the escape Punxsutawney.
Why not walk?
Yeah.
Right? These are, again, things that I don't think the creators intended for the audience to put under such scrutiny for years upon years.
I mean, it was in an earlier script that trying to escape Punxsutawney montage was in there of him going a different direction every day.
Nice.
And then they cut it down to just seeing it once, because that's, again, that goes back to, your mind fills in the blanks.
And you get a 3-hour, 4-hour film if you show all these things, right?
Yeah.
You show the audience, okay, he tried this and he says he can't get out, so that's enough.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, going back to the milestones, Ned Ryerson only shows up 6 times throughout the course of the movie, and one of those times is him just getting cold cocked. So he really only gets 5 scenes.
He's
in
got
the
a
movie.
memorable presence, and he's got good screen time in at least 2 or 3 of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Tip Top Cafe, which I think that is a really great meeting point for a lot of the extraneous characters that you don't realize they make a presence, but they are pretty much all present in the background of all the Tip Top Cafe scenes. You know, you got um, Gus and Ralph, the two drunks. You got Nancy's there. You got Doris, the waitress. They're all in the cafe, and uh, Fred and Debbie, Michael Shannon.
So help me out. Which of these podcast episodes was covering the last day,
The
the successful day?
that was Jake Fluid.
Okay, and isn't the
day
Tip Top
35.
Cafe shown on that day?
What? No, it's
Tip
actually
Top-
not.
The whole thing with Michael Shannon, that's not there.
No, that's at the hotel. That's at the banquet.
I mean, I know we see them there, but we see them at the Tip Top Cafe earlier, and I just can't remember the context of that.
Yeah,
I thought
that's
it was
on
last day as well.
that's on the I'm a God day is whenever you
Okay.
see them, like whenever they're introduced.
Okay. We only see them twice, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible to see them in the background shot a couple
Sure.
times. Like they're there, but they only have speaking roles in the I'm a God day and the perfect day.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then I think the other notable ones are both in the
Yeah.
in the Cherry Street Inn, the guy at the top of the stairs who we never know his name. We only
This guy from Herman's Head.
yeah, I definitely
always-
remembered him from Herman's Head.
That's always what I think of it when I see that guy.
Phil just refers to him as pork chop whenever he gets angry on the second day. And then Miss Lancaster, and we only see him 4 times. We see him the first 3 days, and then you see him right after Phil's improving, where he kisses him on both cheeks and then starts reciting poetry to him. And then Miss Lancaster asking if he slept well. And that one, the last time we see her is whenever he grabs the toaster and dunks it into the bathtub, which I'm actually surprised that Miss Lancaster doesn't actually show up after that.
I get the feeling she doesn't leave the bed and breakfast very often.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But yeah,
That's-
they could have shown her last day or the February 3rd, what have you.
You know, going back to I guess the other statistics, you know, I mentioned the shortest and the longest that everybody said, and I would say the average is between like, you know, 3 to 10 years is what most people said that Phil was stuck in the time loop. And as far as like the running total, most people were pretty well in line with mine, because I think that up until he starts to better himself, it feels like just months to up to about a year until he starts, you know, taking the time to actually learn things and do things to better himself with the studying and the piano lesson and the ice sculpting.
So did you give me your answer? Is that your what's your total tally?
Well, I think he hits a year right right about whenever he's trying to better himself. With the end of the I'm a God day is right at a year, and I think that he spends, I would say, I like one of the interviews, and I haven't gone to re look it up again, but with either the writer or the director, they said that he felt like he spent a lifetime in Punxsutawney, and I like that it took him basically one entire lifetime of February 2nds to make himself a better person, and so he can restart the rest of his actual lifetime. So I would say, like, you know, anywhere between 50 to 60 years, like
An
you know,
adult lifetime.
yeah.
I could get on board with that. I like that interpretation of it. It's a long time for sure, but it's not into the fantastical like I was mentioning it. But yeah, certainly enough time to master numerous trades and learn many life lessons and synchronize days and kill yourself numerous ways. Because like I wonder how many days did he kill himself before noon that we don't even see? That he's like, no, I'm just not even doing this. But then maybe he gives up on that quickly because he realizes the pointlessness of it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But long story short, yeah, I agree. A Lifetime sounds like a very good place to settle on.
Well, that's pretty much. I think we pretty much covered my spreadsheet. I'm not going to go through like every single number I have on here. There's a bit more to it, but
We need
I
more
think
statistics.
I think I covered the big chunks. Thanks for coming on. I know you don't really have anything to promote, and I know I mentioned it on the last episode, but for the second season of this show, I am going to be covering the Twilight Zone. I've got like 3 or 4 episodes where they do have time loops. I believe there's not a lot of repetition, so I'm going to be doing several episodes. I still haven't watched any of them myself yet, so I don't know the exact number of repetitions just like as we're recording this.
Like you've never seen them, or you just haven't seen them recently?
I don't remember ever seeing the time loops in the classic Twilight Zone. I did watch there is one that's like kind of time loop adjacent.
Well, I have to ask, given what you just said, and given the plethora of movies and probably TV shows at this point that have embraced time loops, what made you choose Twilight Zone?
Because that, as far as I can tell, that's the first
Okay,
the first
that makes
instance of a time loop presented in TV or film.
Okay.
It's possible that one happened before that, but not that I've been able to find yet in my 20 minutes of internet research that I've spent on this so far.
Were there any notable films that came out before Groundhog Day that featured time loops?
The not so much notable. Groundhog Day was the first major one released in the US. There was a short film that also became a feature-length film, I believe a TV film, and it became a feature-length film on TV in '93 as well. But it was a short film a couple years before that. It was like I think 12:59, and they actually tried to sue Groundhog Day because they thought that they had copied their idea. But also a few years before that, there was an anime that has some elements of a time loop. I believe the Girl Who Leapt Through Time. It's not actually called that, but I think that's the most popular version because they remade it as an anime a few years ago, and it was a relatively popular anime. So some people might have heard that version, but it was like under a different title, and it was live action and only in Japan.
Right. Okay. Interesting stuff. Well, there's certainly a lot that came after, right?
Oh yeah, so much stuff, and I've still I've seen a lot, but there's still a ton that I haven't seen, and this isn't so much like what I've done with the superhero movies, where whenever I started my superhero movie site, I watched 100 movies that first year, and this one I'm taking my
Watching
time.
one movie 100 times.
Exactly.
Well,
So
when you
this-
get to
this is
Palm
a
Springs, let me know.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have mentioned that, so I'm definitely going to be getting to that sooner rather than later. But I didn't think this was going to be as long as an episode as it ended up being, but that's happened quite a few different times, and I am perfectly okay with that.
Likewise.
But thanks for joining me, and I know you don't really have anything to promote, but do you have any parting words?
You off to see the groundhog later?
Yeah, and as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstights@movienights.com. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on anchor.fm and anywhere else you can listen to podcasts. Be sure to subscribe, so that way whenever the second season does start up, you will be notified of new episodes and you can start listening to them. as they come out. I will also be having an episode of Filmwise, which is my older podcast where I discuss two films, one film that's brand new to me and the other film which is brand new to my guest and is also a superhero or comic book film, since I'm deep into superhero and comic book films. And that episode will be with Justin Goff from the Rambling Ramblers podcast, and we will be covering The Mist, which I've never seen before, and Spawn, which he's never seen before. So that should be an interesting episode, and I'll have it on my new Filmwise feed, which is also on anchor.fm. If you search Filmwise, and that's film WHYS, you can find that feed, but I'll also be sharing it on this feed as a bonus episode as well. So it's been a lot of fun doing this, and I'd like to thank everybody for listening. And it's been an entire season, and I've said this several times. I still don't have a way to end this show, but it's been a lot of fun, and one of these days I'm going to figure that out. So until next time.
Who else could go for some flapjacks?
I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.